Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast with your host, Jerry Rogers.
Welcome to the Business of America, the podcast where we bring in the doers of the economy, science, advocacy, you name it. The leaders in these spaces join the program. Today, we are fortunate to have with us Kelly Ryan, who's the president of the Jesuit Refugee Services USA, and Elizabeth Hoffman, who is the executive director for North America at the One campaign. Today's topic is very topical. It is about foreign aid, about American national security. It's about American values. It's about the budget reconciliation that's happening right now in Washington, D.C. So if you care about what's happening on the news, CNN, Fox, wherever else, well, stay here because we're going to bring it to you in real time. So both of you, welcome to the Business of America. Let's start with Elizabeth. And before we start, tell us a little bit about the One campaign, please.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me on, Jerry. So the One campaign is an organization. I think a lot of people know us as the organization founded by Bono 20 years ago. And kind of what we're most well known for is perhaps PEPFAR, right? The President's Emergency Plan for AIDS, and really championing that program and pushing it across the finish line. However, now our remit is focused on global health and economic development in Africa. So that's kind of where we are at today. And those are the topics we're focused on.
Wonderful. I was going to say Bono, but, we Real Clear Politics. Of course, our listeners know I'm an editor at Real Clear Policy, Real Clear Health. We had a press conference last week, and I did jump out of the gate saying it's Bono's organization. So I didn't do it today. Kelly Ryan. Kelly, welcome. Tell us a little bit more about the Jesuit Refugee Services.
Hi, Jerry. Thank you also for having me on as well. Jesuit Refugee Service USA is a part of Jesuit Refugee Service, which is a apostolic work of the Jesuits. We are operating in 58 countries around the world. Here in Washington, we have an office that serves both a little bit of domestic work, but mostly we're helping our country offices overseas to accompany, advocate, and serve refugees and forcibly displaced people in over 58 countries. We have about 1 million people we serve, and it's very important work for us as a faith-based NGO, and our model is accompaniment. So we don't just parachute in; we remain with the community as part of the community, working equally with them. And we have about 9,000 staff, 9,000 persons working with us. A third are staff, a third are volunteers, and a third are refugees themselves.
So Elizabeth, being an Irish kid growing up in the 80s, U2 was written all over the, in those days, we used to put brown paper bags was our covers. And there was all kinds of U2 drawings and these sorts of things. But it's great to have that attention because of Bono, but your work is incredibly important. And again, in the context of foreign aid, in the context of the cuts we're seeing, I don't think many Americans, Joe and Joanne Citizen, understand the incredible positive work being done at a fraction of the cost vis-a-vis other programs. And I'll just say this, not everything is DEI or LGBTQ plus or some other kind of politicized issue. I know that you and Kelly, you're doing real work with real people with real positive outcomes. So tell us a little bit about the work.
Yeah, that's right, Jerry. I mean, I think we've never taken issue with the fact that the Trump administration, like any administration coming into office, has the prerogative to review what's going on in the US government, not just with the foreign assistance budget, but writ large, and make sure it aligns with their policies, their priorities, and what was promised to the American people. When we first heard about the foreign aid review, we were not immediately concerned. The concern came later that week in relatively short order when the administration indicated that while they were doing this review, they would be pausing almost all of the existing programming.
Everything.
Yes, everything.
Boom. One big chop.
One big chop. And they later kind of came back and said, okay, well, we didn't quite mean everything. We don't want to pause life-saving assistance. But I think it's a matter of definition. There's not a clear definition what's life-saving, what's not. So it caused mass confusion across the US government as to what could continue, what could pause. Programs that I think definitely most Americans would consider life-saving, food assistance, medicines, things like that, were put on stop, even though they'd already been paid for. So they were stopped in transit. I think there's stories you can certainly find of, medicines being locked in cabinets, food being held at port and going bad.
Again, just for clarity, these are items, food items and life-saving medicines that were already paid for.
Exactly. So, I mean, really, again, I think the administration has the prerogative to say, what are we doing? Make sure, do a good audit of it, but let's not halt everything and stop the progress in the midst of it. Because that also is not efficient. It's not effective and ends up costing taxpayers more money than if it had just continued and they'd been looking at it while it was ongoing.
Right. If you're a deficit hawk, and again, $37 trillion debt, $2 trillion deficits year in, year out. We know Congress loves to spend other people's money. But the fact of the matter is, once you've made the investment, once the work is being done, to stop it costs more money. It doesn't make any sense in terms of the budget. And Kelly, I know that you were talking about at the presser from last week, you were talking about how much it costs to start a program up at the same time closing a program down. So talk a little bit, Kelly, about your experience, what your organization in terms of the fits of stops and starts and that sort of thing.
The process has been chaotic from the inside and from the outside. It has been extraordinarily inefficient and confusing to us, the people working in the field, but also to the countries in which we're operating, as well as, of course, to the beneficiaries. So it's been a very difficult process to navigate. For JRS, we received money from the Department of State, and we had 9 programs around the globe helping give wheelchairs to kids who don't have access to those kinds of assisted technology, assisted devices. We've been helping accompany the dying and the chronically ill in South Africa, refugees that nobody else would help. We've been helping Christian and other religious minority populations in Iraq who have been under great strain for more than 2 decades as they try to create livelihoods and recover from really terrible persecution and violence and genocide. So we were working those programs, and I think that they're very valuable. We know that the Doge people used artificial intelligence to go through and do keyword searches, which led to extraordinary situations. So crop diversity programs were X'd out. Programs that every American would think were sensible were just cut because of some uses of language in them. So there was no sort of, as far as we can see, actual evaluation of programs and their effectiveness, which every administration should, as Elizabeth said, do. We completely agree that not every program that was previously funded should continue, but those that save lives, those that give hope, those that expand our sphere of influence and block other influences that are very dangerous are really important to do. So we believe that these programs were valuable. I can tell you that in some NGOs, more than half of their entire programs were cut, and it's hard to discern why some survived and why didn't. So it's not been a transparent process. It's not been an easy process. We've also had wasteful situations where programs were stopped, like our own, and then restarted. So the government owes us $500,000 for paying out required labor law costs for our program in Colombia. If they kept the program going, they wouldn't have had any of those costs. So it's very wasteful to taxpayers.
There's an irony there that some other kind of government regs and government interference impacts the cost of this $500,000 to meet the cost of regs, as opposed to, and again, it makes the argument, your argument, I think, Elizabeth and Kelly, that yeah, we need to streamline government. We need to bring programs into discipline. We can't have politicized work being done. Certainly not work that is counter to the administration's ethos. But that isn't this. Kelly, you said something at the press conference. I want to make sure I get the numbers right. But you said that the numbers, the budget numbers in terms of the spend for for these programs is less than 1% of the entire federal spend. You want to just reiterate that?
That's correct. And we've also done really good studies of this. And Americans believe that foreign assistance is 20 to 25% of the federal budget. So there's a complete misconnect with the reality, which I can understand. People are studying the massive budget bills in their spare time, but it is less than 1%. And if you look at just refugees, it's 0.12% of 1%. So it's a very small amount of money that saves significant numbers of lives, creates hope, creates stability in communities, and creates conditions where people don't have to, leave their countries and are able to stay in either countries of first asylum or be able to live in dignity in their home communities. So development and humanitarian assistance pay off enormously for U.S. in ways of creating peace and stability and advancing human dignity. So I think they're not only necessary, I think they're a good investment for the United States.
But you guys must be Democrats. You are Obama leftovers. You are trying to undermine the Trump administration. Elizabeth, again, I'm not outing you, but you mentioned at the press conference that you're a lifelong Republican, that you were, I think, in the Bush administration. Maybe I forget where you served, but you have served Republican administrations. So are you, Elizabeth, are you some kind of plant that wants to resist the MAGA ethos of this administration? Or are you doing work that actually promotes what this administration wants in terms of national security, in terms of migrants being served in their home communities or in first asylum countries? Look, the world's on fire, right? What's happening in Iran, in the Middle East, what's happening in Russia, what's happening in Somalia, what's happening all over the world. And it seems that if we could serve those who are being driven from their homes, those who are being, and Kelly, you mentioned this, again, another value of this administration, protecting religious freedom. If we can do that and do that there, isn't this a good thing? So first, Elizabeth, speak to the fact that you are not a progressive plant trying to undermine, but rather you are probably a very reasonable, middle of the road, like the rest of it. You're the 80% of us. And then talk about how it's better to serve over there than, get these resources there. Because again, that also matches the administration's ethos.
Yes. So I worked in the U.S. House of Representatives for Republicans for about a decade. I also
Oh, my goodness.
I worked for George W. Bush, not in the administration, but in his post-presidency at his institute.
Oh, wow.
So yes, and I remain a registered Republican in DC, which I can assure you there's not very many of us.
There's three of you. I know all three.
Exactly. You could probably fit us all in a rather small room. And so yes, I am like I said, a lifelong Republican. And I really believe both in kind of the values, because I think that these programs reflect traditional Republican values about human dignity, about individual freedom and liberty that I believe in greatly. And I think that, as you said, these are national security programs, right? This isn't just things that we do out of the goodness of our hearts. The nice thing is, they are good too. You can have things both out of the goodness of your heart and can be strategic national security objectives. But by spending a relatively small amount of money, we prevent conflict. PEPFAR originally, when it was conceived, it was not necessarily conceived as a humanitarian program. It It was a program to promote stability in Africa and to reduce the probability of violent outbreaks. And that's a lot of what these programs do. And they also earn us goodwill. They make better allies. I mean, I was really disappointed to see the Chinese embassy in Kenya recently tweeted out kind of a little graph, and it had like the US versus China, who's really Kenya's friend, and had listed out like the US has trade barriers, China doesn't. The US abandons you in foreign assistance, China gives you more. So this is definitely being noticed and taken advantage of by our adversaries, and that worries me a lot.
Again, the Federal Newswire, the host of the Business of America podcast, they have something called the China Desk, and so even my home network, so to speak, understands this threat. And again, there's so many things, even in this conversation. But there's so many different data points and message points. But let me just, I have a question for Kelly, but let me just, for our listeners, these programs are a fraction of the government spend. There are measurable outcomes, good outcomes that advance American values like religious liberty, like the sanctity of human life, national security concerns, especially with our geopolitical adversaries like China, and then also these programs are a border issue in a sense that there are migrants, and this is something Kelly said at our press conference. Many of these individuals, these families, want to stay in or near close to their home country, and this is an opportunity for them to do that. In fact, if I were in leadership in these other countries, I would not want to lose my population, my workers, my economic future to the United States. So even on immigration policy, what the work that the One campaign, the work that JRS is doing seems to fit in, perfect, a strong word, but fit in nicely with the administration's goals. So Kelly, what went awry, or maybe it's speculation? Has the administration realized that yes, the work that you're doing is in the best interest of the American people? It's America first in a sense. Trump's America first policy proposals. Is the administration, have they turned, or are they looking differently at this?
I think we're seeing some understanding that it hasn't gone as smoothly as it possible. Secretary Rubio has long been a champion of foreign assistance, so I really do hope that he will be able to, pivot away from the DOJ extremes, because they were really heavy-handed, not thoughtful, not based on evidence, not based on looking at performance of programs, for example, or any sort of objective measures. I think you see now people are being asked to return to their former jobs, which they were doing foreign assistance. So I think that's very important. I can tell you that when I speak to staff on Capitol Hill, both Republicans and Democrats have expressed great dismay at the way that this was handled, and that they value foreign assistance and they value the work that has been done. All to say that I think we have to move away from, we have to recover from what has happened and not assume that it will stay, it can or should stay the way it is. 86% just cuts are extreme, and it would be hard for us to revive programs in the near or long term if that's the case. And so, of course, we'll look for other funding sources. Of course, we'll try to be entrepreneurial. But this has done a lot of damage, and we need to really recover quickly from it. Americans were very entrepreneurial, we're very creative. But when you think of the legacies of PEPFAR and the Marshall Plan, I hope President Trump has a plan that equals those. This is something where we can be a world leader. We can put good performance measurements in. We can, professionalize our work and make sure none of it is inconsistent with the administration's values. But I really think the time now to concentrate on how to get aid right is here. And there's thoughtful people that are experts on it, like Elizabeth and many other people, who would love to be involved in that conversation.
For our audiences, Kelly mentions PEPFAR, that is the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, one of the most successful government actions in the history of government actions. I don't think we can find anyone on the progressive left or even the MAGA right who would say this program hasn't worked as intended. And not only are we saving lives, the United States is participating in life saving, but again, it's advancing American interests and American values. It's the kind of soft diplomacy. And then the Marshall Plan, Kelly, you mentioned the Marshall Plan. Others have talked about this. America could have become a real empire after World War II. We were the only nation whose economy was strong. We had the nuclear capacity. We had troops all around the world. And instead of building an empire, we rebuilt the world. We rebuilt Europe, the Marshall Plan. And Kelly, that kind of request or that kind of vision of, what's Trump's vision in terms of impacting the world with American values? And I want our audience to think about that too, because this isn't a left or right thing. This isn't a MAGA, anti-MAGA thing. This isn't the No Kings marches or what we're seeing in protests around the country. This is something that has wide bipartisan, nonpartisan, conservative, liberal, Christian, people of non-faith support. And it seems to have, what's the cliche? We threw the baby out with the bathwater sort of a thing. And so Elizabeth, I'm a fragile optimist, a despairing optimist sometimes. What do you think short term? Are we going to get back to getting these programs up and going, even though it might cost some extra money because of the regs and the startup costs and that sort of thing? And long term, I mean, do you have hope that your work will continue and even expand?
Yeah, so I definitely do have hope. Listen, we just got a poll back. We did a national poll and we asked Americans a couple of questions specific to global health. And one of the questions was, if you support U.S. efforts to eradicate HIV and AIDS around the world. And I was looking at the modeling and I was kind of scrolling over the states. And I think it was like 74% of Texans supported that. And like 75% of Californians supported that. Now I'm a Texan, right? And like Texans and Californians, like there's not much to be agreed on between those two states.
Last I heard, a lot of Californians were moving to Texas.
Exactly. But if like Texas and California can find common ground and support for these programs, then I think we're really on to something. And that's something that should be preserved, not demolished. And so one, I do think that most Americans do support this and see the value in, especially after COVID, preventing disease and global health, crises from reaching our shores, because it's the right thing to do and because it's good for America. It's good for Americans. And so I certainly hope that the administration realizes this. They sent up a rescissions package,
yes,
which passed the House, is now in the Senate. A number of senators on both sides of the aisle have expressed concerns, particular to the global health proposed cuts in there. Among other things, there are other cuts. I think the concerning thing about the rescissions package is the lack of specificity, right? There's high kind of top level numbers on there about what should be clawed back. So the rescissions are proposing to take back kind of what Congress has already appropriated for this year. Nearly $1 billion in global health. Kelly, I know, is following some of the other line items as well. And I think, they should know that most Americans support these programs and they're good for, as we've been talking about, national security. So I think hopefully, we'll see a bit more specificity. The Senate will put a bit more thought into kind of, if we are going to reduce our spending in this area, do it thoughtfully and strategically and not just kind of cutting, top lines across the board.
Kelly, I've said this, because I'm so brilliant, not. If Congress just simply went back to regular order, we do have a debt. We have a deficit issue. We have a debt issue. Of course, it's true. I have 5 children. I'm very concerned, sincerely, about the mess that my parents left me, and now that I'm leaving to my children. However, sometimes we don't need a complex reform or a commission to study and come out with recommendations that no one's ever going to implement. If Congress just simply went back to regular order, where there were committee hearings and there was testimony and there was real debate, I think that we could get our fiscal house in order. So again, I'm a despairing optimist. I'm not sure. I mean, it's been, Congress doesn't discipline itself. And I thought of that, Elizabeth, because you said there's no exact numbers here. These are kind of broad numbers. That doesn't work. I mean, I have a family budget. I know what my car bills are, what the insurance is. I know what my kids' tuition is. I can't just simply say, all right, I'm going to throw this much money over there for the tuitions and that much money over there for car insurance. No, I have to know specifically. And then also, what's my return on investment on my kids' college, on their tuitions, on all the rest of it. But Kelly, let me ask you this, because this is provocative. And we did have one provocative question at the end of our press conference about, all this wasteful spending and the journalist who brought this up brought up some a good point about the right is very concerned about NGOs gone wild, NGOs doing their own political thing, undermining American values. In fact, doing the opposite of what you guys have laid out, what you women have laid out here today. Well, Kelly, can you speak to that a little bit about how we're not undermining American values? We're not talking about the crazy programs. What is your message to the Freedom Caucus or to members who, for some reason, just they have an idea about this, and we need to kind of have them think differently or reconsider how they think? Any thoughts on that?
I've worked in this field for so long, and I have to tell you that I've seen some really threatening things arise, which we don't talk about so often. And those are the rise of China and the rise of other organizations, non-state actors, like groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, groups like Al-Qaeda. Those organizations have figured out that they need to get to new recruits. And how do they do that? They go to very poor neighborhoods. They buy people breakfast and lunch. The 9/11 bombers, they were in those madrasas because their families were super poor. So we can either be on the sidelines and watch these groups go into China, to go into Asia, to go into Europe, or we can be a partner for really good development. And I think one story I'd like to tell you is there was an NGO in Senegal, and they were doing some very good work in the health area, and they decided to go into democracy work. So they went to South Sudan, and they were doing training on what democracy is. And this imam was really angry about it at the beginning. And he was sitting like this. And then after day 3, he stood up and he said, I was against this because I didn't understand this is a universal right. I didn't understand. I thought this was just, trying to make us behave like the West. And now I completely embrace this, and we need to do it. So there's a piece of it where we're going to lose the fight for ideas as well as the friendships that we've created that is really at risk here. And this soft power is something that's like not thought about a lot by many people, but it's extraordinarily effective. When you see President Bush go to Africa, he is treated more respectfully than Bono or any famous musician. I mean, he is the rock star. And so he didn't do it for that reason. He did it for altruism and also for these other reasons. He did it to advance U.S. interests. And his national security directive aligned with that, which was to promote human dignity. So I believe the Freedom Caucus believes in human dignity, and that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to create crazy programs, but instead do evidence-based with performance measurements like USAID. So again, we could show, like PEPFAR, so we can show 26 million lives saved. That's an extraordinary achievement that no other country could have ever done. And we should continue to do those kind of programs in this administration and beyond.
It's interesting. We've mentioned now soft power a couple of times, and there's concern now because there is a rift, so to speak, within Donald Trump's support because of Iran and how far the U.S. Should help Israel, what's happening in other parts of the world, American troops. And one way to avoid putting men and women in harm's way is to exercise America's soft power. And we have enormous potential there, and it has worked in the past. And so, Thomas Jefferson once said, what's past is prologue, or and I think that's what he said. If that's not, we'll edit that part out. But anyway, but the fact of the matter is, we've done this before, and we've done it well, and we shouldn't let the criticism is, well, these programs are politicized. But it seems to me we're politicizing some programs that are doing America First work. I love, Elizabeth and Kelly, your piece at Real Clear, the American argument for foreign aid, and it's doing well there. Our listeners can go to Real Clear, Real Clear Policy, Real Clear Health, Real Clear Politics, and find the piece. But that's essentially, Elizabeth and Kelly, what you're doing here. You're making the American argument for foreign aid. So I'm going to be respectful of time. Elizabeth, some final thoughts, something I did not mention that we should mention. You have the floor.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. To go back to your point about the deficit, I think, you're 100% right. It's concerning. Americans should be concerned about that, but we're not going to kind of cut our way out of this, right? Because you could cut all discretionary spending. That's health. That's, aside from entitlements, it's foreign assistance, it's defense, all of that, and still not balance the budget. We need to grow our way out of this. And an important piece.
If I had a bell right now, I'd be ringing the bell. Not enough of our political commentators or policy experts talk about growth, and this is and again, we've seen it in the past. I interrupted you. I apologize, but you are 100% right in terms of growing our way to a better, more prosperous future. But Elizabeth, please continue.
Yeah. And how do we grow our way out of this, right? We trade, we sell our products, our goods, our services to other markets. And Africa is the fastest growing continent in the world. That is where the majority of the world's population will be. And so it is in our economic interest, not just our national security interest, not just in the interest of doing the right thing, but also in our economic interest to develop good relationships, to sustain those relationships. So we have trading partners. So we have people that, want to watch our movies and listen to our music and buy our goods, and that we can rely on for, to grow our businesses. So I think that's a really important piece as well.
Yeah, I thought for a second you said music, and I think about the music my kids listen to. I'm like, maybe some music but I'm joking. My mom does the same thing when I was a kid. My mom, I remember one time I was listening to, I don't know, MTV or whatever, and Robert Plant came on, and I was a big Led Zeppelin fan, and my mom was like, "Who's this Led Zeppelin guy you keep on talking about?" I'm like, "Mom, it's a band, it's not a guy." And you mentioned again trading partners, and Kelly, to your point, what America did with the Marshall Plan was right on. It was good policy, it was good for Europe, but it was good for America, because we established strong economies and strong trading partners, which allowed for the great, the 50s, the 60s, in terms of the American economy. And so, Kelly, same question to you. It seems that others are politicizing this. You're trying to bring some fact-based, some measurable data to say, no, this is good for America. It's good. It's America first. It's good for the sanctity of life. It's good for national security. I mean, I can go on and on and on. I'll run out of fingers. But it's also good for Elizabeth's point. It's good for economics. It's good for the economy. It's good for American workers. It's good for American families. But Kelly, from your perspective, something that I might have missed, or maybe you want to just add on to what Elizabeth said.
Yeah, I want to take a different path here, just to flag one thing for your audience.
I was hoping you would.
She said it so beautifully. I don't need to repeat that at all. But what I would say, that something to point out to social conservatives is that both in the case of all three of our last popes, John Paul II, Benedict, and Francis, all of them have talked about the right and the freedom to stay and live in dignity and safety. They've talked about the right to migrate when you're being tortured or subject to persecution, or you can't eat. And they've also talked, or you have no access to any ways to take care of yourself. And they've also talked about the return to safety and dignity for those who can't stay in a country. But this idea, this human flourishing idea, is Catholic social thought. And So development really is creating conditions where people can thrive. I love the quote from Congressman Chris Smith, who's one of my great heroes, and he says
Yes.
that
I have to say this, Kelly, but he's from New Jersey. I got to mention Jersey.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
He's my hero, and he says about particularly about investment at the grassroots, that it's not a handout, it's a hand up. And that's really an American way. I mean, we love the little guy, we love the underdog, and development is helping the underdog get to be a player. And then when we do that, of course, that creates markets and relationships and friendships and all that benefit Americans tremendously. But there's an element of foreign assistance that, in my view, should be altruistic, but there's an element of it that is absolutely beneficial to us, and it's not an either or. So it's a both and that's what I'd like to end on.
I love it. I love the fact that Elizabeth mentions the why economic conservatives should favor this. I love how you talked about how social conservatives and people of faith should support this. I'll add one layer on top of all this. I don't see this as a left or right issue either. I think that if you're progressive and you did participate in the No Kings protests, or if you were someone who went to the anniversary parade of the 250th anniversary of the United States, the U.S. Army, if you were at that venue, both sets of Americans should support this, and that doesn't come along often in American politics. So hopefully, moving forward, we can better, real clear, the Federal Newswire, the Business of America podcast. We could shed light on these issues. And again, it's cliche, but we want light. We don't want heat. We want civil debate, even spirited debate. But at the end of the day, we want the truth. We want facts. And Elizabeth and Kelly, I really thank you so much for joining us in the Business of America. I know I want our audience to go to Real Clear and find that the American argument for foreign aid, but also your organizations, the One Campaign and the Jesuit Refugee Services USA. Please go to their websites, find out more about their work. You know what? And if we haven't convinced you today, that's fine. But do your own research. Trust but verify. Go and do your own work. And I'm sure, given the right, I believe, given the right arguments, reasonable people will come to a reasonable conclusion. So I challenge our audience to go and study this issue on your own. Don't just listen to the clickbait news venues commentary or the cable shows. Do your own research. So with that, Elizabeth, Kelly, thank you. And our audience, thank you for another great edition of the Business of America podcast. We'll see you next week. Thank you.
This has been the Federal Newswire's Business of America podcast, hosted by Jerry Rogers. Check out the Federal Newswire's family of websites, as well as their social media stream